If you've ever felt more alive in your own space than in a crowded room, this is for you. Living alone isn't loneliness. It's a quiet kind of power. Stay with me for 30 seconds and I'll reveal 12 surprising reasons mature men secretly love it, from total control of their space and schedule to guilt-free rest, no drama, crystal clear finances, and the freedom to say no without explaining. Most importantly, you'll learn how to keep your heart open without trading away your peace. If you've ever wondered, why does Solitude feel like home? Keep watching. He doesn't complain. He doesn't explain. He just lives quietly. And that's exactly how he likes it. Most people assume a man living alone must be lonely. But the truth is far more subtle and far more powerful. Because for many mature men, solitude is not a sentence. It's a sanctuary. Let's explore the things no one sees but every strong man secretly enjoys about living alone. If you've felt this quiet contentment too, drop a comment. I finally found peace in solitude. 1. Total control over his space. No arguments about decorations. No suggestions about furniture. No gentle hints that maybe the recliner doesn't fit the aesthetic. It's his space, every inch of it. And that means freedom. The mug on the counter? It'll be there tomorrow. The laundry? Done when he feels like it. The living room? A place of rest? Not negotiation. For a man who spent years compromising, discussing, adjusting, there's a quiet thrill in knowing that his environment reflects only him. Not a curated couple. Not a social image. Just him. His space becomes a mirror of his mind. Calm. Deliberate. Undisturbed. 2. The freedom to be silent. There was a time when he talked just to be polite. Just to fill the space. Just to keep things from feeling awkward. Now he treasures the quiet like others treasure gold. No more asking, "How was your day?" when he's too drained to listen. No more nodding through someone else's rant just to be agreeable. No more noise that doesn't lead anywhere. Living alone means his ears and mind finally get to rest. He doesn't rush to respond. He lets thoughts breathe. He speaks when there's something worth saying, not just to avoid discomfort. He can spend a whole afternoon in stillness. Just a dog-eared book open. Tea going cold. The window cracked to let in the world's softest noises. Birds fluttering. A distant lawnmower. The occasional laugh from a neighbor's porch. It's not lonely. It's sacred. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of peace. And for a man who's lived through years of chaos, expectations, and social performance, that peace is the real luxury. He used to think silence needed to be fixed. Now he knows it's exactly what heals him. 3. Waking up to stillness. There's something powerful about waking up without anyone else's schedule looming over you. No shared alarm clocks. No chatter from the other side of the bed. No early questions. Just sunlight filtering through the blinds. A stretch of old bones. A slow shuffle to the kitchen. He stands barefoot on cold teal. The kettle hissing. There's no rush. In this quiet hour, he remembers who he is before the world asks him to be anyone else. 4. Eating what he wants. When he wants. Dinner at 9 p.m. Breakfast at noon. Toast at midnight. A sandwich eaten standing at the sink, not out of laziness, but because he can. He no longer asks, "What do you feel like eating?" He doesn't need to balance cravings, or negotiate flavors, or worry whether a meal is exciting enough for someone else. It's not that he doesn't enjoy cooking. Sometimes he makes an entire meal just for the smell of it, garlic sizzling in butter. A steak seasoned just right. A pan of roasted vegetables he might not even finish. But it's always on his time. In his rhythm. Some days he grazes all day, never sitting for a full plate. Other days, he pours a glass of wine, sets out a single place setting, and eats in candlelight. Not for show, but because he wants the meal to mean something. He eats what he likes, when he likes, and how he likes. It's not about rebellion. It's about reclaiming agency. Food is no longer a shared performance. It's a private act of self-respect. No one judges how many times he's had the same leftovers. No one comments when dinner is just crackers and cheese. And best of all, no one interrupts the silence between bites. 5. Financial clarity. One of the most underrated joys of living alone, knowing exactly where every dollar goes. There are no surprise Amazon boxes, no unexplained charges, no quiet resentment over different priorities. He budgets with clarity, saves with purpose, spends on what matters to him and no one else. And when he wants to treat himself, there's no guilt. 6. Naps whenever, wherever. There's an art to mid-afternoon napping. And over the years, he's perfected it into a kind of ritual. No shame in it. No apologies. No sideways glances from someone implying that rest is laziness. Just the soft pull of gravity, and a man who listens to what his body is telling him. He doesn't set an alarm. He doesn't plan it. Sometimes it happens in the recliner with a book resting on his chest. Sometimes it's on the couch, sunlight warming his feet. Other times it's on a park bench, jacket folded under his head. While birds chatter above, there's a freedom in obeying that quiet call to rest. Not when convenient, but when needed. It's not indulgence. It's intelligence. A body that's been through decades of work, pressure, and pushing itself to the limit, now finally gets to pause without being questioned. Living alone means no one interrupts the drift into sleep. No one stomps around. No one clicks the television on, just as his eyes close. No one mocks the way he snores for 10 minutes before waking refreshed, smiling, and a little surprised at how deeply he slept. These naps aren't escapes. They're returns. Back to the self. Back to stillness. Back to rhythm. Gentle resets that don't ask for anything but surrender. And that's something only solitude can offer. The luxury of sleep without guilt. 7. Having time to think? Solitude is a sharpening stone. Without constant reaction, without conversation to fill the air, his mind has room to wander, to reflect, to grow. He thinks about where he's been, where he might go, the mistakes, the victories, the roads not taken. He writes more, reads more, dreams differently. Living alone doesn't shrink his mind. It expands it. 8. No drama. He's not afraid of love. He's afraid of noise, the emotional kind. He's lived through arguments that started from nowhere. Nights spent deciphering what a sigh meant. Mornings ruined by tension he didn't cause, but somehow was expected to fix. He knows the feeling of being in a room with someone and still feeling like he was walking on broken glass. Now he's chosen differently. His home is a quiet temple, not a battleground. No one slams a door to make a point. No one drops hints instead of speaking clearly. No scoreboard. No tug of war. No undercurrent of unresolved everything. If he leaves the dishes, they stay there. But no one punishes him with silence. If he's quiet, it's because he's content, not because he's hiding something. There's no one keeping tally. No one weaponizing affection. He doesn't have to second-guess his tone. Doesn't replay a conversation in his head 100 times. Trying to figure out what went wrong. Here, peace isn't a moment. It's the default. Not because he's afraid of conflict, but because he no longer lets chaos rent space in his life. He'd rather be alone in stillness than partnered in tension. That isn't bitterness. That's wisdom. 9. The freedom to say no without guilt. Once upon a time, he would say yes just to keep others happy. Even when he was tired. Even when his gut said no. Even when he longed for stillness, instead of another dinner party filled with small talk. Now he doesn't explain. Doesn't apologize. Doesn't feel the pressure to soften his boundaries with excuses. No thanks is a full sentence. If he's invited out, he checks in with himself first. Does this add to my life, or does it drain me? There's no more guilt. No more anxiety about disappointing others. Because he's learned. Every time he says yes to something he doesn't want, he's saying no to himself. And he's done with that. 10. Rediscovering old passions. In the quiet of his own home with no distractions, no interruptions, he begins to hear echoes of a younger version of himself. Not with regret, but with recognition. The old guitar leans against the wall, no longer collecting dust. The calluses on his fingertips slowly return, string by string. Not for performance, but for presence. The melody is rough, simple, but his, and it moves something in him that no conversation ever could. The toolbox comes down from the shelf, the same one his father used. He doesn't build to impress anymore. He builds to reconnect. With the scent of cut wood and the satisfaction of creating something real, he remembers what it feels like to shape the world with his hands. Stacks of books once untouched now line his reading chair. Stories half finished now get their endings. Notebooks filled with old ideas, inventions, poems. Reflections open, like old friends who waited patiently to be remembered. A fishing rod, a sketchpad, a camera bought 20 years ago. These things resurface like treasures, not relics. And in them, he finds parts of himself that had gone quiet, not gone missing. He's not escaping the present. He's reclaiming the pieces that once made him feel most alive before life demanded he become someone else. He doesn't do these things for anyone to see. He does them because they anchor him. To joy, to memory, to identity. In Solitude. Old passions aren't hobbies. They're doorways back to self. 11. The ability to rest without explaining. He turns off his phone. Not on silent. Not face down. Just off. Like closing a door between him and the noise of the world. There was a time when he felt the need to explain his tiredness, to justify a nap, to defend why he didn't want to go out, to prove that rest wasn't laziness. That time is gone. Now he slips into soft clothes long before the sun sets, lays on the bed at 8 p.m., not because he's sick or exhausted, but because his body whispered, "Enough today," and he chose to listen. And when he wakes up at 10 a.m., with sunlight on his face, and no one expecting anything from him, he feels no guilt, just gratitude. There are no questions like, "Are you okay?" No raised eyebrows. No pressure to be productive every minute. He rests when he wants. How he wants. A nap in the afternoon. An early bedtime, sitting still in the middle of the day. Eyes closed. Just breathing. He no longer needs permission to pause. No longer fights the need to slow down. He doesn't owe anyone an explanation for taking care of himself. Rest, to him, is not absence. It's presence. The moment when he finally returns to himself, and in a world that constantly demands more, choosing rest without apology, that's rebellion. That's wisdom. 12. Feeling truly at home in his own company. This is the part no one told him about. When he first started living alone, he feared the silence, the echo of his own footsteps, the idea of no one waiting for him at the door. But with time, the silence became a symphony one only he could hear. He stopped fearing his own company and started enjoying it. He doesn't need background noise to feel alive anymore. He doesn't need conversation to feel seen. He simply exists fully, richly, peacefully in the presence of himself. Sometimes he laughs out loud at his own thoughts. Not because he's going mad, but because he's learned to delight in his mind's quiet playfulness. He sings while cooking, talks back to the radio, says things out loud just to hear what they sound like. There's no audience here, no applause. And that's the beauty of it. He walks through his space with ease, barefoot, coffee in hand, knowing this is his domain, not in a controlling way, but in a grounding one. Here, he's not performing, not pleasing, not managing anyone's moods. He's simply being, and that, for a man who spent years navigating emotional weather patterns, is a kind of liberation that feels almost holy. He no longer sees solitude as a gap to fill. He sees it as a sanctuary. And every time he sits in that silence with no pressure to entertain, no fear of judgment, he realizes this isn't loneliness. This is coming home. Being alone isn't about who walked out. It's about who walked back into the self. Many men were never taught how to sit with their own presence. They were taught to perform, to pursue, to please. But solitude strips all that away. And what remains, if you let it, is something beautifully unshakable. Stillness, clarity, peace. He's not avoiding love. He's not rejecting connection. He's simply no longer willing to trade his peace for noise. He's chosen a life where he can breathe at his own pace, rest without guilt, move through his days without explanation. And when you can do that, when your own company feels more like home than anyone else's approval ever did, that's not loneliness. That's arrival. If you found this quiet power too, drop a comment. Solitude gave me back my life. Because sometimes the most profound relationship you'll ever have is the one you finally build with yourself.